Chapter 5. The Temple First Visit. The guides Arya provided were two hunters, a woman and a man, who had grown up on the forest's edge and knew the paths into the deep interior the way someone knows a difficult relative. Familiar, necessary, held at a respectful distance. They did not speak much on the first day. They moved ahead of the group at a pace that was sustainable over rough terrain, and paused at each junction with the specific efficiency of people who had learned that unnecessary delay was its own kind of danger. The forest deepened as they moved east. Arya had been paying attention to this for the past week, watching the trees grow older and larger with each southward mile, and now they were moving directly into what the coastal people called the deep forest, and the quality of the change was unmistakable. The canopy went from 40 feet to 60 feet to something that was less height than a condition. The light that reached the floor was filtered through so many layers of leaves that it arrived green and attenuated, moving slowly, like light underwater. The sounds were different. The large birds that had been a constant presence in the coastal forest were absent here, replaced by something quieter and closer, small movements in the undergrowth, the occasional distant crack of something large and unhurried, the sense of a great deal of life operating very carefully. The 3 days' walk was not easy terrain. A river to cross on the second morning, at a ford the hunters knew, the water waist-deep and fast enough to require care. A long slope on the second afternoon, scrambling through undergrowth that the hunters moved through with ease, and that Gendry moved through with the dogged competence of a large person who has learned to trust their body in difficult ground. Cray moved like a ranger, quiet, economical, always slightly ahead of where Arya expected him to be. Dessau moved like someone who had not done a great deal of off-road hiking, and was discovering reserves of determination he had not previously tested. Old Moth moved with a steady, deliberate pace that had nothing of his usual ease in it, covering the ground not because the ground interested him, but because the ground was between him and the thing responsible for what had happened to Lura. On the morning of the third day, the lead hunter stopped and pointed ahead. For a moment Arya could not see it. The forest was so thoroughly itself that additional structure within it was hard to differentiate. Then her eye found the angle, a corner, too regular to be natural, buried under decades of vine and moss growth. Then another. Then the shape of the thing emerged from the green the way a hidden image in a pattern emerges once you have found the key. You could not unsee it after. The temple was enormous, or had been. The forest had spent centuries reclaiming it, and the forest was largely winning, but the bones of the structure resisted. Massive stones, fitted without mortar in a style she had never seen, organic in their arrangement, curving where you expected angles, flowing where you expected rigidity. The building expressed something in its structure, inward, gathering, a form that drew toward its center rather than radiating from it. The entrance was on the west face, half buried in vines but unmistakably an entrance. They went in. Asterisk. The interior was cooler. Not cold. The deep forest was not cold, but there was a quality to the air inside the standing walls that was contained in a way that had nothing to do with the gaps in the stone. The building held its own atmosphere. She had encountered this in the oldest parts of the House of Black and White, in the deep chambers below the temple floor, and she recognized the quality, the sense of being somewhere that had been accumulating in tension for a very long time. The main chamber was still roofed, stone vaulting that should not have survived centuries of forest growth above it, and had survived. The floor was thick with the detritus of years, but beneath all of it she could see the original floor, the same stone as the exterior, worked in the same flowing patterns. At the chamber's center, a circular mark in the floor, larger than the ones on the walls, perhaps 3 feet across, precisely circular, worked in the stone with a depth of incision that suggested this was the focus of whatever the building had been for. She crouched beside it. Recent, she said. She was pointing at the area near the mark's edge, where the detritus that covered the rest of the floor was conspicuously absent. Someone had been sitting here, recently enough that the pattern was still clear. The compressed area where weight had rested, the scuff marks of movement. Someone uses this place, Gendry said. Yes. She was still crouching when she became aware that the chamber was not empty. It was not sound that told her there was no sound, not from anything that had not been present a moment ago. It was a quality of the air, a sudden specific density of attention, the sense of being in a space that had just acquired a new center of gravity. She rose and turned in the same motion. He had come from behind one of the interior walls, not from outside, not from the passage she had noted on the far side of the chamber, but from behind a standing section of interior wall where the shadow was deep enough. He was simply there, where he had not been a moment ago. Tall, lean, handsome in the specific way Arya had described, the kind of face that had strong structure and no visible age, the kind that could be 35 or 60 depending on the light in your frame of reference. His clothes were right for the region but not quite of it. He wore no weapon that was visible. He looked at her. Not at Gendry, Not at Cray or the hunters or Old Moth or Dis-So. At her, with the focused attention of someone who has been looking for a specific thing and has found it. "I've been waiting for someone like you," he said. His accent was perfect. Not any accent she had heard, not Westerosi, not Essosi, not the coastal dialect she had been learning. Something that sat before all of these, a cleanness of articulation that suggested language itself rather than any particular language, as though he had learned to speak so long ago that the specific origin of the learning had been smoothed away. It was directed at her. The sincerity was total. It was not a line, he meant it. She was still processing the syntax of what to do next. Her training had 17 responses ready, organized by threat level and available geometry. And the problem was that none of the threat assessments mapped cleanly onto the specific quality of this particular moment. When he stepped into the shadow between two pillars and was gone, the temperature in the chamber dropped by several degrees. Silence. Arya stood in the center of the chamber and thought, faster than me. The assessment arrived clean and without ego, the way the best assessments do. He had moved and she had not been able to follow the movement. That was new information. She turned to find the entrance on the far side of the chamber. She had noticed it on the way in, half obscured by the growth that had forced itself through the broken sections of the rear wall, easy to miss if you weren't looking. Now she looked. A passage entrance, narrow, shoulder width, perhaps less. Stoneworked like the rest of the building, descending into darkness. Gendry held his torch toward it. The flame bent inward, toward the darkness as if the passage was breathing in. Below, nothing visible. The torch's light died 2 feet in, swallowed by a depth that was too much for a single flame to reach. She measured the width with her eyes. Her shoulders would fit. Gendry's would not. She looked at the walls and the floor and the particular quality of the worked stone around the entrance. The motifs here were denser and more deliberate than anywhere else in the chamber, as if this was the actual purpose the whole building had been pointing toward. She felt Gendry beside her, measuring the entrance with the same assessment she was making. "Not yet," she said. "No," he agreed, "not yet." They were in this now. Both of them knew it. They had been in it since the street in Varath, since Lura dropped in the street, since the smile. But this was the point where knowing and acknowledging became the same thing. They turned and walked back through the forest toward Seville. Chapter 6. Piecing it together. 3 days back. They arrived in Seville in the early evening and went directly to Areth's meeting hall, and the full group settled into the business of comparative information, with the specific efficiency of people who had been operating toward a shared question. Dis-So spread his maps. He had been drawing the entire time the coast, the settlements, the forest edge, and now the temple at the end of his most recent notation. Marked with the careful precision he brought to everything. The disappearances, plotted on his map with the dates and locations he had gathered from the traders and from Areth's records, they radiated outward from the temple like rings from a stone dropped in water, expanding year by year, each circle larger than the last. The pattern was not subtle once it was drawn. Whatever was doing this was getting more capable, reaching further. 10 years, he said, pointing to the innermost ring. The first accounts all from within a day's walk of the temple, and then he traced outward, year by year. The range doubles every 3 years, roughly. The current reach puts it as far north as Varath, which we know because he stopped. He looked at Old Moth, he continued, which we know because of what happened in Varath. He looked up. At this rate, in another 3 years it will reach Arethas, in 5 or 6 further than that. Cray spread his own notes. "There's no match," he said, "for the man in the temple. No legend, no historical account, no trader's story that describes anything that fits what we saw. I've checked everything I have." He paused. "What I have is not nothing. The motifs on the temple walls appear in accounts of the Far East that predate the Valyrian freehold, some of the oldest geographical records that survive. The accounts call the place they describe the territory of the undying of the continuous self. Whatever built that temple is old, older than any empire." "Older than any living empire," Arya said. "Yes." "He takes something from people," she said. "The people who come back hollowed, they are intact. Their bodies work. They breathe, they swallow, they move if you move them, but whatever made them themselves is gone." She paused. "And some he takes all the way." She did not say Lura's name. She did not need to. "It is not death. It is something more specific than death. He takes the thing that makes someone a person and leaves the rest." Nobody said anything for a moment. "And the passage under the temple," Cray said. He was practical, as he always was, assessing the situation in terms of what it required rather than what it meant. "You didn't go down it." "We weren't ready," Arya said. "Are we ready now?" Arya thought about this honestly. "We need more information before we can be ready for what's down there. We need to know what we're dealing with, what has and hasn't worked against it, whether there are people anywhere who know more than we do." She looked at Cray. "Sor, in Arethas, the eldest. Do you think she knows more than she said?" Cray was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. I think she knows considerably more than she said. Then we go north, Arya said. We talk to Sor. Then we come back and we figure out how to go down that passage. Asterisk. That night the others had gone to bed. Arya sat at the window of the room she and Gendry shared, looking south toward the forest she could not see in the dark. The settlement was quiet in the way of a place that had learned to be quiet at night. The single lamp of the harbor master's window was visible from here, burning its steady announcement that someone was awake and watching. Gendry was at the small workbench he had set up in the corner. He had the pale metal in front of him, and he was not working it, not striking, not applying heat. He was holding it, turning it slowly in his hands, with the specific quality of attention he brought to things he was trying to understand. He had stopped forcing it, she had noticed. In Varath, in the first days, there had been an element of contest in his approach, the honest contest of a craftsman who has not met a material he could not eventually work, meeting a material that was declining to cooperate. The set of his shoulders when he put the hammer down had the quality of a man keeping a frustration managed rather than absent. This was different. He was listening to it, with the patience of a man who had decided that what the material wanted was more important than what he wanted to make. What changed? She asked. He turned the metal over once more before answering. I stopped trying to make it into what I wanted, he said. I'm trying to figure out what it wants to be. She thought about this for longer than the conversation strictly warranted. She did not say any of it. She turned back to the window. Get some sleep eventually, she said. Eventually, he agreed. Chapter 7. The Dead Man. A week later. Arya managed the days by doing what she always did. She ranged. She talked to people, gathering the accounts of the hollowed survivors' families with the specific care of someone who understood that the survivors themselves could tell her nothing, but the circumstances of their hollowing might tell her something. She was looking for a pattern within the pattern. The Harvester, she had started thinking of him by the name Arth used. The way you sometimes name a thing as a way of managing it, was not operating randomly. Nothing that had been doing this for 10 years, with increasing sophistication, operated randomly. The pattern she found, he took people who were isolated. Not exclusively, there were accounts of people taken while not entirely alone, but preferentially. She also noticed something about Gendry and the metal. He was spending more time with it and the time was changing, less observation, more something that looked, from the outside, like conversation. He was using the hammer differently, not striking so much as touching, probing, a dialogue of small contacts rather than the broad strokes of shaping. She did not interrupt this. She had learned, over months of watching him work, that interrupting Gendry mid-process was like interrupting a sentence. The thing was still possible afterward, but something was lost in the interruption. She was in the market on the morning of the 7th day, when she noticed that one of the regular faces was missing. A young man, she had learned enough faces in Seville to know who belonged and who didn't, who had been in the market every morning she had been there, selling fish from a boat his family owned. He was not there. The family running the adjacent stall looked across at the empty space and then looked away quickly, with the practiced speed of people who had learned not to look at empty spaces too long. She found him by the river at mid-morning. He had not been difficult to find. Someone else had found him first and had sent for Arth, and Arth had sent for her, because Arth had decided very early in their acquaintance that Arya's assessments were more useful than his own, and was acting accordingly. He was lying in the grass above the river bank on his back, arms at his sides, face to the sky. He was, from a distance of 20 feet, possibly sleeping. He was not sleeping. He was 22, she estimated. Well-built, healthy in the specific way of a young man who worked physically every day of his life. No wound, no sign of illness in any form she could identify. The body was simply without the thing that made it a living body. Life gone, the body intact and cold. She crouched beside him. She read him the way the faceless men had taught her to read the dead, the body as a record of the manner of ending, and what this body recorded was nothing she could name from that training. Not injury, not disease, not the natural cessation of something worn out by time. Depletion, the best word she had for it, as if something essential had been drawn out rather than failing or being damaged. The entry points were his temples and the inside of his wrists, where the pulse ran closest to the surface, the same mark she had seen on Lura. He had been drained of what made him alive, and he had died from it, because most people did. She stood up. She shared what was useful with Arth. She kept what was forming as a theory. Asterisk. That night he was in the room. She had been awake. She had been awake later than anyone knew, which was a habit she had developed in Bravos and had never lost. The late hours of private time she had never quite shared. The room was dark except for the small lamp on the windowsill, and she was sitting at the table with the lamp between her and the window, thinking about the body by the river and the pattern of the marks. She became aware of him before she heard anything, which was the thing she could not fully explain to herself afterward, and the thing that unsettled her most. She had been trained by the faceless men. She had sat with the No One quality for years, learning to be quiet in a room in ways that most people never attempted. She had learned to enter spaces without disturbing them. She was, by any objective measure, among the best in the world at noticing when she was not alone. And yet he was at the window before she knew he had arrived. Tall and lean against the night sky outside. The window opened the 2 inches she always left it open, and he was inside the room's space without having come through the window in any way she could account for, standing by the far wall with the composed patience of someone who is entirely comfortable wherever they happen to be. He looked at her across the lamp's small light. She had her hand on the cat's paw before she was consciously aware of it, the muscle memory operating in the fraction of a second before thought caught up. She was on her feet. She was very still. She was not used to people being able to do this to her. He did not move. He looked at her with the same quality she had seen in the temple, the composed attention, the genuine focus, and said nothing for a moment, and then said, "You examined the young man by the river today." "Yes," she said. "What did you conclude?" "That you killed him." Something shifted in his expression that might have been appreciation. "I did," he said, "though killed is not the precise word. The process is more particular than killing." He was quiet for a moment. "You know something about what the process is. I can feel it in how you looked at him. You have a frame of reference for this that most people do not." She said nothing. She was tracking the distance between them, the angle to the window, his hands empty, the rapier not drawn. He was not here for the thing he had done to the young man. He was here for something else. "What things?" she said. Not a question. A prompt to keep him talking because he was telling her things and the things were useful. "The dark," he said. It was the simplest word he had used, and it landed with the weight of something considered carefully. "You have shaped yourself around violence, not through violence, not damaged by it, but deliberately, the way a smith shapes a blade. It is in how you carry yourself, in how you hold still, in how you look at a room when you enter it. Someone who shaped themselves around violence and survived the shaping and came out the other side stronger." He paused. "I have been on this continent for longer than I remember. I have not encountered what you are, not for a long time." She heard the door. Gendry's step was identifiable even in near silence, his weight, the specific quality of how he crossed a floor, and she knew he was coming through the door a half-second before it opened. She had a fraction of a second to calculate whether to warn him, and she decided against it, because warning him would give the man by the wall information about how she communicated. Gendry came through the door and saw the harvester, and went for his hammer in a single continuous motion that required no pause for assessment. The rapier was in the harvester's hand before Gendry had covered half the room. He moved to intercept, the blade a bright line in the lamplight, and Gendry swung the hammer in a wide arc. The harvester was no longer there when the arc completed. He had simply stepped aside, a shift of 2 feet that used none of his speed, just the angle, and the hammer's momentum carried Gendry off balance into the corner of the room. Arya was already moving. She crossed the room on the diagonal while the harvester's attention was on Gendry's recovery, needle clearing its scabbard, driving toward his right side. He pivoted. The rapier came around not to block but to redirect. It caught the flat of needle and pressed it aside with a controlled push that used her own momentum to spiral her off her line of attack. She recovered in half a step and came back from a new angle, lower, inside the rapier's reach, the cat's paw now in her left hand. He stepped back, creating distance, the rapier tracing a figure that covered both the high and low lines simultaneously. They circled. The lamp threw shifting shadows. Gendry recovered from the corner and came in from the left, hammer first. The harvester moved between them, forward, unexpectedly, into the space between Gendry's advancing hammer and Arya's position behind him, and turned Gendry's swing with a forearm block that sent the hammer into the wall. The rapier found Gendry's forearm in the same motion, a shallow cut, surgical rather than destructive. Gendry dropped to one knee, swearing. Arya closed the distance. She had been adjusting since Varath, refining her read of his movement pattern, looking for the specific quality that would let her pass the redirecting. She found what she thought was an opening on his left, a small window, worth perhaps a second, and she committed to it and drove the cat's paw toward his chest. The dagger went in. She felt the resistance of cloth and then, beneath it, what should have been the resistance of flesh and then the yield of something penetrated. She felt it. She drove the blade into the hilt. He looked down at her hand. He did not bleed. There was no reaction in his face of the kind she had seen in everyone she had ever stabbed, the flinch, the breath change, the specific moment of a body receiving bad news. There was a brief pause, a quality of attention directed at the blade in his chest with the mild interest of someone examining an unexpected development. He reached up. He removed the dagger from his own chest with one hand. He looked at it for a moment. He set it down on the table next to the lamp. She stood between him and Gendry. They looked at each other in the lamplight. "Not yet," he said. It was not a threat. It was information, delivered with the same sincerity as everything else he said. "We will speak more when you are ready." He went to the window. He stepped through it and dropped 12 feet to the street below, and by the time Arya and Gendry reached the window, the street was empty in all directions. Silence. Gendry was pressing his free hand to his forearm, which was bleeding in the specific way of a shallow cut that looked dramatic and was mostly inconvenient. He looked at the catspaw on the table where the harvester had placed it. He looked at Arya. "The knife didn't do anything," he said. "No." What does that mean, for everything?" She picked up the catspaw. She checked the blade, no chip, no damage, the Valyrian steel exactly as it had been. She put it back in her belt. She sat down at the table. "It means we need more information," she said. Her hands were not entirely steady. She was aware of this, and she did not mention it, and she did not show it more than the slight quality of restraint that someone who knew her very well might have noticed. Gendry, who knew her very well, sat down across from her and said nothing about it. "We go north," she said, "tomorrow." "Yes," he said. "Sor knows things she hasn't told us." "Probably. And we need to understand what that passage under the temple is. What's down there?" Gendry was quiet for a moment. "What does he want from you?" She thought about what the harvester had said, about the dark, about what he had sensed in her. "He's lonely," she said. It was the truest answer she had, and also the most disquieting one, because she had recognized it in him immediately and spent the past hour trying not to. Gendry looked at her for a long moment. "Well," he said, "that's his problem." She almost smiled. She did not, but it was close. "Go to sleep," she said. "We have a lot of walking tomorrow." Chapter 8. Compulsion. A week later, and they were still in Seville, and the attack came on the 4th day after Gendry's encounter with the harvester. It came in the evening, which was somehow worse, because the evening belonged to the ordinary and the ordinary was still accessible. The group was gathered in the common room of the inn, the remains of the evening meal still on the table, Snow writing, Cray reading. Old Moth sat apart from the others at the window end of the room, looking out at nothing particular. He was present, which was what Old Moth had settled into, present, functional, doing what needed doing. But there was a quality to his stillness that was nothing like the Old Moth who had filled the Shadowcat's crossing with steady opinion. He had become a quieter man, and the quiet carried weight. 2 men came through the door. Arya knew them. She had learned the faces of Seville with the automatic thoroughness of her training, and these were faces she had filed. A fisherman named Perrin, mid-30s, who had 3 children and an elder mother, and who had given her directions to the river on her first morning in the settlement. A younger man, the brother of one of Arya's assistants, who had helped carry supplies when they arrived. Good people, in the straightforward sense of people living their lives with ordinary decency and ordinary purpose. They came through the door without any of the qualities that aggression usually carried, no anger in the face, no tension in the shoulders, none of the preparatory narrowing of attention that signals a body committing to a violent act. They were directed. Purposeful in the empty way of a wound mechanism. The tension had been set by something else, and they were simply the delivery. There was no one home behind their eyes. They went for Gendry. Not the whole group, not Arya, not Cray, not any of the others. Gendry, specifically, and with the focused totality of the compulsion, because the compulsion had been calibrated. It wanted one thing done, and it wanted these 2 bodies to do it, and everything else was irrelevant. Arya was in motion before she had made a conscious decision, the specific quality of her training placing her body in the right position before her mind had fully processed what she was reading. She stepped between Perrin and Gendry, and she did not draw needle. She held him. She controlled his arms. She used his own movement against him. She managed the situation with the minimum force that would prevent it from getting worse, while she tried to find a solution that did not require anything she could not take back. Cray had the younger man. He was a ranger, and he was doing the same thing she was, managing, not finishing. The problem was that the compulsion was total. Perrin was not fighting her with the hesitation that an aware person would have brought to fighting someone who was clearly better than them. He was fighting her with everything he had, his body spending its reserves without conserving them, because the thing that would have told him to conserve was gone. She took a hit to the ribs that she could not avoid without releasing him, and did not release him. She took another to the face, open hand, glancing, but hard enough to sharpen her attention considerably. She heard Gendry's fist connect with something, and the younger man go down. And then, in the specific moment that she was positioned incorrectly, her weight wrong, her balance recoverable but not yet recovered, Perrin's elbow found her jaw, and her grip slipped, and the space between her hand and his arm was enough. He went for his knife. She had hers out faster. The catspaw moved with the decision her training had made while the rest of her was still catching up, and it was fast, and it was clean, and it was done before she had finished thinking about whether to do it. She stepped back. Perrin died. The compulsion released the moment he died. She saw it, the visible moment of a body becoming a person again, the expression shifting from the blank directed quality to something that was, in the fraction of a second before death completed itself, recognizably Perrin. His face. His actual face, with whatever he had been before this evening still present in it, arriving too late to do anything about what his body had done. She stood over him. Cray stood over the other man, who was alive and compelled, and would be alive and not compelled in a few minutes when whatever the harvester had put in him finished working. Arya cleaned her blade. She did it slowly, with the deliberate care of someone who needs something to do with their hands. She looked at Perrin's face. She had killed people before. She had killed people who had done nothing to her except be on the wrong side of her list, and she had made a decision about those killings years ago and had not revisited it. She had killed people in fights where the choice was her or them, and she had made the same calculation every time and arrived at the same answer. She had not, in a very long time, killed someone who was innocent. She knew it was necessary. Knowing it was necessary was not the same as it being all right. She had spent years making herself someone who killed cleanly and without regret, and she found, standing over this man she had not wanted to kill, that the training did not cover this precisely. It covered the act. It did not cover the specific weight of this particular dead face. She filed it. She did not share it tonight. She would find a place for it later in the ledger she kept of the things she had done that she did not regret but did not forget, and she would carry it the way she carried all the others. Not lightly, not heavily, simply with her. It was hers. She had done it. It was done. The other one, she said to Cray. Alive, he said. She looked at Gendry, who had not been touched, and who was looking at Perrin with the specific expression of a man working out how to carry something he didn't ask to carry. You're all right, she said. Yes, he said, are you? She thought about what the honest answer was. I will be, she said. He nodded. He did not push it. This was one of the things she loved about him, though she would not have used that word. He could tell when to ask and when to wait, and he was almost never wrong about which was which. Chapter 9. The Illusion and the Shield. A week later, the night before they were due to travel north to Arethas. She had been asleep. She was certain of this afterward, not the light sleep of someone staying near the surface, but the genuine deep kind, the kind her body demanded after days of sustained alertness. She had not meant to sleep deeply. She had been training herself back toward it since the attack, the compulsion having introduced a new variable into her threat assessment that her body was still calibrating around. She woke in the dark. The room was dark in the way of no moon and no lamp, only the faint difference between the darkness of solid wall and the slightly less absolute darkness of the window. Gendry was standing over her with a knife raised. She was on her feet, and the catspaw was in her hand before she had finished processing the image. The faceless men's training did not root through cognition for this class of stimulus. The proximity, the raised arm, the blade, it bypassed the cognitive layer entirely and put her body in the right position while her mind was still catching up. She was standing. She had distance. She was between him and the window, the catspaw in a grip that meant she could use it in any of 4 directions. The figure plunged the knife into her chest. She braced. She felt nothing. The blade went through her without resistance, without pain, without the specific terrible sensation of something entering the body at speed, and the figure dissolved, not fell, not ran, dissolved, the substance of it becoming less present and then absent, the room empty in a way it had not been a moment before and yet had been, because there had been no one there. She stood at the end of the bed with the catspaw drawn. Her breathing was wrong, elevated, shallow, the body having mobilized for a threat that had turned out not to be physical and not having received the signal to stand down yet. Beside her in the bed, Gendry woke up. He came awake the way he came awake from deep sleep, which was not gradually, his eyes open, his assessment of the room conducted in the first second, his attention on her immediately when he registered that she was standing at the foot of the bed with a weapon drawn. He did not ask what happened. He had woken to find her in defensive positions twice before, and he had learned from the first time that asking immediately was not the most useful response. He got up. He came to stand near her, not touching, present in the way he had of being present, simply there, warm and solid and real, occupying the specific space of himself in a room where the air was still unsettled. Her breathing was evening. He was here, she said, not physically. Something he made was here, she thought about this. He can make things that look real. Like the compulsion, Gendry said. Like the compulsion, different kind. This was addressed to me specifically. It knew what I would wake to find terrifying. She paused. He made it you. The thing holding the knife was your body, except it wasn't. Gendry was quiet for a moment. He chose something that would make you hurt me. She looked at her hand again. I almost did, my training almost. But you didn't, he said. No. He stood with her in the dark for a time. He did not say, it's all right. He did not say, you're safe now. Both of those things would have been slightly wrong, and he had a quality she valued very much, which was that he did not say slightly wrong things in order to be reassuring. After a while she put the cat's paw back in its sheath. She sat on the edge of the bed. He sat beside her. He's escalating, she said. First he approached me directly. Then the compulsion using people we knew against Gendry. Now this. She paused. He's moving faster because something has changed. What's changed? She thought about it. We're investigating, we're asking questions. We went to the temple, we know about the passage. She looked at him. He knows we know, and he doesn't like it. Good, Gendry said after a moment. If he doesn't like it, we're doing something right. She would not have said it exactly that way, but she agreed with the conclusion. Before dawn, another body was found in the settlement. Asterisk. That evening, Arya went to find Gendry at the forge. He was sitting outside it, on the bench where Areth Smith sat when they were waiting for metal to heat. The pale metal in his hands and nothing else. No tools, no fire, just the metal in his hands and the particular quality of his attention that meant he had been at this for some time. She sat beside him without speaking and watched. He was moving his hands along the surface very slowly, with the pressure of someone reading rather than working. His eyes were almost closed. After a while he said, without opening his eyes fully, "It wants to be a shield." She looked at the pale chunk in his hands. A shield. A big kite. He turned it over slowly. I tried to map out an ornament on it last week, a stag, because, he paused, it wouldn't take it. I worked the surface for 2 hours and the metal kept refusing, smoothing itself back out. It doesn't want an emblem, it just wants to be what it is. How long, she asked. A few days if I start now. The shape is already there, I just have to bring it out. He opened his eyes and looked at the metal, turning it one last time. Whatever it is, it's the best thing I've ever made, and I haven't started yet. She sat with him a while longer. The settlement was quiet around them, the specific post-crisis quiet of a community that had spent the day absorbing something terrible, and was now in the process of distributing the weight of it through all the ordinary activities of living. She went to sleep that night with the cat's paw in her hand. Asterisk. He finished the shield on the 5th day. She came to the forge as the light was going gold in the late afternoon, and found Gendry standing back from the anvil, looking at what was on it. The shield was 3 feet long and 2 feet across at its widest, the classic kite shape that narrowed toward the bottom. The pale metal had been worked into something that was simultaneously lighter than it should be. She could see this from how little effort it cost him to lift it by the grip, which had been formed from the metal itself rather than attached, and denser than it looked, the kind of density that came from something structurally complete rather than from weight. The surface was smooth except for the shallow channels of the working, the marks of the hammer visible in a pattern that was, she realized, not accidental. The lines of the working described something, a form that was not quite a shape but was not quite abstract either, in the way of the temple's motifs. He had tried to put the stag on it. She could see the place on the upper surface where the metal had been worked and had resisted. The surface was perfectly smooth where the emblem should have been, smoother than the rest, as if the metal had closed over the attempt. It's extraordinary work, she said. He looked at it. He nodded once, with the particular nod of someone who knows the quality of what they have made, and has decided to accept that knowledge rather than deflect it. He lifted the shield and measured its balance, shifted the grip, swung it twice. Then he hung it from the wall hook beside Jorath's other completed work, where it sat with the composed presence of something that had always been going to be exactly what it was. Chapter 10. Sor's knowledge and loss. They traveled north to Arethas with the urgency of people who have run out of patience with waiting for answers. The journey that had taken them 2 easy days the first time took a day and a half now, Arya setting a pace that the others matched without complaint. Arethas felt different from the first visit. The fear that was ambient in Seville had arrived here. Not as strongly, the forest was further, the disappearances had not yet reached this far, but it was present, a new layer under the settlement's ordinary activity. A child ran across their path and was called back sharply by a voice from a doorway. 2 women at the well looked up when the group entered the main square and looked at them for longer than was customary. Maren came to meet them. She looked at Arya's face and said without preamble, "Sor is expecting you." Sor's house was on the settlement's south side, smaller than her authority suggested, with the tended quality of a space that was used for thinking rather than display. Books, or this continent's equivalent, bound parchment documents of considerable age, on every horizontal surface. the organization of them suggesting a system that was clear to its owner and not immediately obvious to anyone else. Maps, some of them very old, pinned carefully to the walls. Sora herself, 70-ish, bright-eyed, seated at a table covered in open books, with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting and is glad the waiting is done. "Sit," she said through Dessau. They sat. Asterisk. She spoke for a long time. She had no generational knowledge of the specific threat. 10 years was too recent for the oral tradition she carried, and the figure in the forest had not been present in her lifetime or her parents or their parents. But she was a scholar, in the specific way of a community elder who understood that her most important function was the preservation and interpretation of knowledge that would otherwise be lost. She had been collecting everything the settlements had seen and heard for 10 years, and she had been comparing it to the oldest records her archive held, and she had arrived at conclusions. She had been waiting for the right people to share them with. The first, the temple was old enough to predate the settlements by centuries, possibly millennia, and was unique on this coast. The records described it obliquely in the oldest accounts, always with the same quality of careful distance, the specific restraint of people who understood that there were things in the world that were better left alone, not because they were evil, but because they were not of the scale that human attention could safely address. The second, the oldest text in her archive contained a reference to an object, a sealed vessel. The record was fragmentary, a copy of something older, translated through at least 2 languages she could identify and possibly more, the edges of the meaning worn down by the transmission. What remained was this. Something had been contained. The containment had been deliberate, performed by people who understood what they were containing and had constructed the containment with care. The vessel itself was the specific form of the containment, not merely a container, but the thing that the binding required, and the vessel had been hidden in the specific place that was most protected. The third, there was a word for what the contained thing was. The word did not translate well. The closest equivalent in the common tongue was something like, the spirit that does not end, the spirit of the continuous self. A thing that was, by its nature, without death, not immortal in the way of a god, but functionally unending because it had found a way to persist through bodies rather than being bound to anyone. Sora stopped speaking. She let the silence settle for a moment, and then she looked at Arya directly, not at Dessau, not at Gendry, not at the group. At Arya, with the specific quality of someone who has been waiting to say a particular thing to a particular person and has decided the time has come. She spoke. Dessau translated without his usual hesitation, the words coming out carefully, as though he understood their weight and did not want to drop any of it. "You carry 2 things, Dessau said, relaying her. "The person who loves and the person who kills. Most people who carry both are destroyed by the contradiction. You are not destroyed, you have made yourself from both." He paused, listening, then continued. "This is not common. I have read many accounts of many people. I have not read of this." Another pause. "Do not let anyone tell you that one of those things must be given up for the other. They are both you. Both are needed. What is coming will require both." Arya said nothing. She was aware of Gendry beside her, very still. Sora looked at her for a moment longer, with the composed certainty of someone who has said the true thing and does not need to say it twice. Then she turned back to her books. The room was quiet. Arya looked at her hands, and at the wolf-carving shape of the inner pocket of her pack, and at Gendry across the table. "Thank you," she said to Sora. Sora said something brief. "You're welcome," Dessau translated. "Now eat something. You look like you haven't slept in a week." This was inaccurate. She had slept in a week, technically, but she appreciated the spirit of it. Asterisk. That night under Sora's roof, she slept without dreaming. Gendry slept beside her. This was not new. Had not been new for months, had stopped being new so gradually that she could not have identified the exact moment the arrangement had shifted from proximity into something more deliberate, only that at some point they had stopped pretending otherwise. He was on his left side, her back to his chest, his arm around her in the specific way that was not accidental and had not been accidental for a long time. This was one of the things they did not discuss, because discussing it would have required words they had not chosen to use, and the arrangement was clear enough without them. She had learned to sleep like this, with the specific solid warmth of him at her back, and when she woke without it, now the absence was notable in a way she did not examine too closely. She woke before dawn and lay still for a while, listening to the settlement's night sounds. She was thinking about the harvester. What he was, how long he had been it. She knew almost nothing about him, no name, no history, no account of how he had come to be what he was. No one did. The coastal settlements had been living in the shadow of him for 10 years and had nothing but his effects and the one consistent description. Tall, lean, ageless, precise. She had faced him 3 times and fought him once and had a knife in his chest, and still knew nothing beyond what she had observed directly. She thought about the loneliness she had named to Gendry. That had been the truest thing she had said about him, and she had said it because she recognized it. She had been lonely in ways she had never named, at the House of Black and White, in the years of training, in the long becoming of something she could not quite explain to anyone who had not been through it. She had been lonely, and she had chosen to stay in the shaping anyway, because the shaping was the truest version of herself. He had been doing this for what the account suggested was a decade, possibly longer. Operating at the edge of the world, taking pieces of people, collecting something he could never keep. She thought about what it cost a thing to exist like that, always moving, never arriving, taking without receiving, aging none of the bodies it wore. If it had once been capable of loneliness, it had been living the purest form of it for a very long time. She thought about Gendry. She thought about the way he had sat across from her in the small lamplight the night the harvester came through the window, and had said nothing about the fact that her hands weren't entirely steady. She thought about the wolf carving in her pack, about what it meant to be known by something made rather than something said. She thought about the difference between the harvester's kind of want, the want that reached for and took without knowing how to hold, and what she felt when she looked at Gendry. She did not have a clean word for what she felt when she looked at Gendry. It was not the same as wanting. It was more like recognition, like something that had always been true being confirmed. She was still thinking about this when she became aware, in the way she had become aware of him before, that something had changed in the quality of the air. She was on her feet, and at Sor's door before she had fully thought it through. The common room, empty. The corridor beyond it empty. She checked each room with the rapid economy of someone who has been trained to clear a space, moving through the house in under 10 seconds. Sor's room. The door was ajar. The lamp inside was still burning. Sor was in her chair by the window, which was how she read in the evenings, the chair turned toward the window to catch the light. She was seated correctly, hands in her lap, head upright. She was not reading. Her eyes were open. They were open and they saw nothing, not the unfocused quality of someone lost in thought, but the specific absence that Arya had seen in 11 people across the southern settlements, the absence that meant the thing that made them themselves was no longer there. The marks at her temples and her wrists, faint and specific, the same marks she had learned to recognize as the harvester's signature. Sor was hollowed. Arya stood in the doorway and looked at her for a long time. She did not go to her. She did not call for Meryn. She stood and looked at the old woman sitting in her reading chair, breathing, intact, absent, and she did not let herself feel it fully. She could not afford to feel it fully, not right now. She would feel it later. She would carry it the way she carried everything, not lightly, not heavily, just with her. She turned and walked back to the room. She sat on the edge of the bed. Gendry woke at the change in her weight on the mattress. He looked at her face. "Sor," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he sat up and put his hand on her shoulder, briefly, the specific brief quality of a hand that is not trying to fix anything but is simply present. She covered his hand with hers for a moment, then she let go. "He knows we're coming for the vessel," she said. "This was a message. He wanted us to know it." She found Meryn in the kitchen before the rest of the settlement woke. She told her. Meryn went very still and said nothing for a long time. Arya sat with her in the kitchen in the early morning quiet and did not try to fill the silence, because the silence was doing necessary work. "She knew," Meryn said eventually. "She told me when you arrived the first time. She said, 'These are the people.'" She looked at her hands. "I hope she was right." "So do I," Arya said. It was the most honest thing she could have offered. Chapter 11. The second fight. He was waiting for them on the road south. They were 2 hours out of Arethes, heading back towards Seville, when the group stopped at a bend in the track and found him standing at the edge of the forest path 100 feet ahead. Simply there, the way he was always simply there. Not arrived, not approaching, just present, the road bending around him and the forest behind him, and the morning light falling on him at an angle that made his features clear and his expression readable from this distance. Composed, patient, done with intermediaries. Arya had been carrying a particular quality of focus since the morning's events in Sor's house. She had felt it settle over her the way armor settles, a necessary compression of the self, the exact measure of what was needed, and she felt it sharpen now. She had been waiting for this. "Behind me," Gendry said, quietly, from beside her. He had the shield in his left hand and the short hammer in his right, and he had shifted his weight forward in the specific way that meant he had made a decision. "No," she said. "Arya. We fight together, not in front of each other." She felt him accept this. They had had versions of this argument before and both of them understood the logic. He was stronger, she was faster, and in combination they were something that was worth more than either of them separately, and fighting in front of each other sacrificed the combination for the reassurance of cover that was not, in fact, better cover. They walked toward him. He watched them come with the undivided attention he gave to Arya, and the sidelong awareness he gave to Gendry. As they closed the distance, he raised one hand, not for a weapon, but with the open gesture of someone who wants to speak before the alternative begins. He looked at her for a moment with the composed attention of someone who has been studying a thing carefully and intends to communicate what they have learned. "What I sense in you is rare," he said. "What you have made yourself into is unlike anything I have encountered, and it is being wasted on a life that will end. He let this land. Come with me. What I am offering does not die." He spoke without naming her. He had no name for her. She was not a person he knew from outside. She was a thing he had identified in a room, a quality he had recognized, a flame he had found interesting. That was all she was to him, and the offer was as much about his own hunger as anything else. She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said. Something moved in his expression. Not anger, something closer to sorrow, though she was not entirely sure something that had been what it was for as long as it had been it was still capable of sorrow in any conventional sense. He looked at her as if memorizing the shape of the refusal. Then the expression closed. He drew the rapier. He was on them before the sound of the drawing had finished, not waiting, not giving them time to orient, the rapier already in motion as he crossed the distance in 3 steps that were too fast for 3 steps. The rapier came at Gendry first from the left, a testing cut, and Gendry took it on the shield. The pale metal rang, not the clang of iron on iron but something with depth under it. A resonance that lasted half a second longer than it should have. The harvester paused for one beat and looked at the shield, and something passed across his expression that was not quite recognition, but was adjacent to it. Gendry did not give him time to consider it. He drove forward with the shield on his left arm and the hammer in his right, using his weight the way a man his size had to use it, pressing forward, removing the space that speed required. The harvester gave ground, an actual retreat of 2 steps, and Arya used those 2 steps to come in from the left with Needle. He managed both of them. The rapier deflected Needle with a small, precise movement of his wrist, while his body repositioned to take Gendry's next shield blow at an angle. He could not redirect the shield the way he redirected blades, and they could both see him adjusting to this fact in real time. The rapier came around at Gendry's exposed right side. Gendry caught most of it on the shield. The blade scraped along the pale metal's face and bit only a glancing cut into his shoulder rather than the wound the harvester had intended. He took it and kept moving. Not helpless. Not what the road had been. Not what Vareth had been. The shield was changing the mathematics of this fight, and the harvester understood this and was recalculating. For 30 seconds they held him, which was not the same as defeating him, but was genuinely more than they had managed before, Gendry's shield forcing each angle to be reconsidered, Arya pressing from outside, neither of them touching him but the combination creating a problem his usual approach did not cleanly solve. She watched the harvester weighing options. She watched him decide. He decided. Not a slash, a thrust. Controlled depth pulled back immediately, the blade in and out before Gendry had finished registering the entry. A deliberate wound placed to compromise the leg without ending the fight because he did not want to kill Gendry, Arya understood in that instant. Not with the blade. When the harvester killed, he wanted something that a corpse could not give him. The blade was for management. It had been for management for the entire 10 years he had been operating on this coast, used to control, to remove from the problem, never to end. A body he had killed with steel was a body he could not harvest. He wanted to limit Gendry. He wanted to move Gendry out of the fight and have her alone. Gendry went to one knee on the packed earth of the road, with his left leg giving out beneath him. The hammer dropped. She was driving toward the harvester's right side when it happened, committed to an angle she couldn't recover from fast enough to intercept before he reached Gendry. She heard Gendry go down and she adjusted, pivoting mid-stride, sacrificing the angle to change her direction, and the adjustment cost her the opening she had committed to, and she had to start from disadvantage. The harvester turned from Gendry toward her, and what he did next was not the rapier. He put the rapier up. He extended his hand toward her, palm out, with the specific gesture of something reaching rather than striking, and she felt it immediately. A pressure at her temples and at the inside of her wrists, at the places where the pulse ran closest to the surface, and where, she now understood, the interface between the self and the body was thinnest. Not pain, pressure, and beneath the pressure, something that knew exactly who it was pressing against. She had expected this, abstractly, as a possibility. She had not expected how personal it was. How precisely it was calibrated not to her in general, but to the specific part of her that she had spent her life in argument with, the part that had made the list, the part that had killed Perrin and not been destroyed by it, the part that had sat in the house of black and white, and learned to dissolve and chosen to come back. The dark that the harvester had sensed from across a room, and had been circling ever since. He was not trying to take her. He was trying to show her that he already understood her, that he knew exactly what she was and wanted her to know that he knew, and that this knowing was the offer, the thing she had never found anywhere else. Someone who saw the whole of it and was not afraid of the whole of it. She felt the pull of it. She felt it the way you feel the pull of deep water, not as a desire to drown, but as a desire to understand the depth. She held. She held by being completely herself, by refusing to dissolve into the reaching, by numbing herself internally with the precision of someone who knows their own edges and is not confused about where they are. Arya Stark, daughter of Catelyn and Eddard Stark, sister of Robb, Jon, Sansa, Bran, Rickon, named of the North, built by the faceless men and not taken by them. She held. She heard Gendry behind her. He was on his feet. It should not have been possible. The wound was in his thigh and it was bleeding, and his leg had given out under him 30 seconds ago. None of this had resolved. What had changed was that the Harvester was reaching for something that was not Gendry, and not the hammer, and Gendry had processed this and made a decision, and the decision was, not while I'm alive. He pushed off the ground with both hands and his good leg, and came upright with the shield already raised, the pale metal between him and the figure on the road, and he drove forward with everything his legs had left in them. The Harvester broke the reaching and turned fast, faster than Gendry's charge, turning to face and raising the rapier. But the shield was not a man and did not have momentum that could be redirected. It was 3 feet of dense pale metal, moving at full sprint behind a man who weighed 17 stone, and the Harvester had nowhere to go. The shield connected full with his chest. The effect was immediate and total. The moment the pale metal struck him, the coherence of the thing wearing Vayne's body simply stopped. There was no gradual disruption. It was immediate, the way a candle goes out when you wet your fingers, present and then not. Vayne's body went from inhabited to vacated in a single instant. His eyes went blank in a way that was different from the Harvester's usual composed emptiness. Genuinely empty, the lights out, the animating intelligence simply elsewhere. He stood inert, sword arm at his side, simply standing in the road like an object left upright. Arya drove the catspaw into his heart. The blade went in cleanly this time. Not the nothing of the room in Seville, not the absence of consequence. This time there was flesh, and the resistance of something vital, and the immediate warm evidence of a mortal wound. Vayne's body bled with the absolute ordinariness of a man dying, the blood real and immediate and unstoppable. His knees gave. He dropped to the road. The shadow creature came out of him. It tore free from the fallen body in the moment of the wound, metallic and black and wrong, the wrongness of something that existed in this space but was not of this space. Perhaps 3 feet across, dense as shadow with form, moving with the purposeful directness of something that knows exactly what it needs. It turned toward Gendry. Not with loneliness, not with the quality of an offer, not the reaching toward of something looking for a companion. What it was doing was acquisition. Gendry was close, alive, breathing, the nearest available vessel, and the mist moved toward him with the urgency of a thing that cannot fully express itself outside of a body, and is correcting this as quickly as possible. Gendry swung the shield at it. On instinct, on the same instinct that had sent him charging at the Harvester a moment ago. Something in trouble, here is what I have. The pale metal connected with the mist at full arc. Sparks. Not the sparks of steel on flint, but something larger and stranger, white gold, erupting outward from the point of contact in a radius that expanded for a full 2 feet in every direction, the light of them lasting a full second and then gone. The mist recoiled. Not retreated. Recoiled, the whole mass of it contracting inward as if struck, drawing away from the shield with a motion that had the quality of pain in it, the involuntary quality of a body responding to heat before the mind has processed what is happening. The mist pulled back. It hovered above Vayne's fallen body for a moment, gathering, and then it descended back into him. The wounds closed, not slowly, rapidly, the body knitting with the speed of something that had healed worse and would heal again. The blood ceased, the pallor lifted. The torn thing reassembled itself in seconds. Vayne's eyes opened. He looked at the shield, he looked at Gendry, he looked at Arya. He looked down at the rapier, lying on the road where it had fallen with him. With a fluid motion, he pressed the toe of his boot against the flat of the blade and kicked sharply upward, sending the weapon spinning into the air. His hand came up and caught the handle at the apex of the spin, the rapier arriving in his grip as though it had always been on its way there. He held it loosely at his side. For the first time in all their encounters, his expression held something she could not quite name. Not fear. Something adjacent to it, the recognition of an equation that had just changed in ways he had not anticipated and needed to reevaluate. He was something that had survived by never engaging in encounters whose outcome was uncertain. The outcome of this encounter had just become uncertain. He withdrew. Not fled, he would not have accepted that word, and Arya was honest enough to grant him the distinction. He withdrew, deliberately and at a pace that preserved his composure, and he was into the forest before Gendry could bring the shield to bear a second time. They stood in the road. Gendry was bleeding from his thigh in a way that needed attention. She turned to him and found him already putting his free hand to the wound, assessing it with the practical attention of someone used to managing physical damage. She pulled a piece of cloth from her pack. She tied it around his thigh with the specific efficiency of someone who has done this before. "How did you know?" she said, "with the shield?" He looked at her, he looked at the shield, he said, "I didn't." "Then why?" He considered this. "Because you were in trouble," he said, "and it was what I had." She did not have a response to this. She finished the binding on his thigh. Her hands were very steady. He was looking at her with the expression she recognized as the particular look of someone deciding whether to say something they have decided not to say. And as usual, he made the correct call and didn't say it. "Come on," she said. "We need to talk to everyone."